No, that ain't right. That can't be right. I knew Nicky and Zig was boosting stuff, cameras, shit like that. Nothing like this.
You knew? And once Nicky got used to boosting stuff and seeing a little money, what did you think he was gonna do? Turn straight all of a sudden? And give it up? No, Frank. Once you gave him a taste on a house, just...
That was never. I mean, he knew. He knew. Everything I did, the cans I let through, the money we got from that went to keeping what we had.
God damn it, Frank.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whether you're joining us at work or trying to get to sleep or on your iPod whilst going for a jog or something. Welcome to Caught on the Wire. It's Season 2, Episode 11, Bad Dreams. Toby, are you ready for our penultimate episode this week?
Raring to go, as always. As always, can't wait to get into this discussion. So, glad to be back. How are we doing this week, Alex?
Yeah, great. I understand that you've been all caught up on Better Call Saul now, which I think we've mentioned a couple of times. I've been keeping up with that, and there's the new episode coming out, well, as of the date of recording, tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it'll be this Tuesday.
That's right, yeah, we have our finale of that season coming along tomorrow. Actually, no, it's today in the US, but we do have to wait an extra day because of the time difference and stuff over here. So it was a bank holiday weekend over in the UK, so that means that Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday were all days off, and I had some time to catch up with Better Call Saul, and I'm glad I did because I think the last 3 episodes have been very, very solid, and I'm now very excited to see where the final episode takes us. So, yeah.
It's a very kind of different show to The Wire, isn't it? It's kind of good to be watching something that stylistically is so different to The Wire.
Yeah, it's very...
At the same time, I think it's a good partner piece in a way.
Definitely. I think there are 2 ends of the spectrum there when it comes to style, as you say. One that really draws attention to itself and one that really draws attention to the kind of natural environment. So it's tricky, but I do love...
There's so much nonchalance in The Wire.
I particularly love
Whereas
that.
in Better Call Saul, it's a lot more kind of, everything's very pointed and very kind of, the images are very carefully constructed. Nothing in it is a coincidence, nothing in it is just because of good environmental, it's all like very environmentally staged, if you know what I mean, whereas in The Wire it feels incidental.
It's kind of like the direction's very generous. They really go out of their way to show us how things work. So for example, like remember the apple cores that Mike was eating when he was like staking out the house? It's a nice way of showing us how time flies by without a cutting to the morning or whatever. It was just really nice, and I think the music in that scene was ridiculous as well. It was really kind of like a stealthy stakeout music that was.
There's a lot of scheming music in there.
It was almost kind of quite cheesy, but it worked really well in that scene because it kind of made such a big deal of it. So
yeah. Anyway. Enough about Better Call Saul.
Sorry guys, this is the Wire podcast.
Let's get back to the Wire podcast.
Oh dear, we do love our tangents. I guess we generally start with Listener's Corner, don't we?
Yes, I was going to say, if we poke our heads inside Listener's Corner, we do have one email here from Dave in LA, who we heard from last week. Said he was just about to start listening to the show.
How far has he got, Alex? In 1 week?
Well, he says that he started with Season 2, Episode 1 today, as of the time that he sent the email, which would have been April the 3rd.
Okay.
That was when we got it. So, I don't know if he's just kind of burnt through everything and caught all the way up to this point now. If so, then good job.
Very dedicated.
Yeah, he says that he's enjoying the show, which is good. Cheers, Dave. And he says he wanted to share something with some real fans.
Real fans.
So we're real fans, Frank.
Excellent.
Real fans. We legitimately exist. So he says that he's. So he says that he saw the premiere of every episode
for every single episode, and he was always talking about it with all of his friends. So clearly, you know, when it first came out, this guy's clearly dedicated. It's very, very enthusiastic email. Says that he never liked The Sopranos, which is a controversial comment. I
Never
think.
liked. Oh, that is controversial. I definitely agree that The Sopranos is not up to the same standard. And I still haven't finished The Sopranos, which is pretty surprising since I started it about 3 years ago. But yeah, I've never been compelled, so I do agree with you on that one. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's bad, but yeah.
He also goes on to say that, and I quote, "As good as Breaking Bad was,"
and it was very good.
The far runner-up was The Wire. It was a far runner-up to The Wire, sorry.
Ah.
So, obviously, holding The Wire above all else here.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, that's fair enough. I'd agree with those sentiments, personally. So. Yeah. Okay.
He also makes some allusion to having a Cuban lawyer, Levy,
Cuban Levy.
because he says that he knows some characters, shall we say,
Okay.
who attest to the fact that this show is very realistic.
Yeah.
I think I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Does he know some insiders? Does he?
Yeah, I don't. I feel like if I read out the whole email, that we would get shut down by the FBI the next day, and that.
I think Kutris has a little.
I don't know why
monitor.
the American authorities would be coming after us later. But
Well. so he
did
knows
not
Levy,
snuggle
is this
me.
or a Cuban version?
A Cuban Levy,
A Cuban
apparently.
Levy, okay.
So,
Oh right, well, no, we're very thankful for all the correspondence, and the more enthusiastic
Yeah.
you guys are, the more happy we feel, I guess, about correspondence.
yeah,
so.
I know. I really enjoyed your email, Dave. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for getting in touch, and it's good from here. Good to hear everybody's kind of opinions. I mean, we'd love to hear anybody who has any sort of contravening opinions to our own on the episode. Anything that you disagreed with that we might have said, because it's always good to kind of start a discussion based on that. I think on how people interpret certain scenes differently. So yeah, we'd love to hear anything like that as well as any support. Always grateful for the support, but definitely would love to start a bit of discussion on it as well if you guys are interested.
Definitely, yeah, keep them coming.
So yeah, that's Listeners' Corners for the week. Is there anything you want to go through before we start our recap?
No, I guess chapter 2 is normally our recap, so it's my turn this week. I managed to split it down into a nice chunk again, and we've got about, I think it's 12 chapters or so.
Okay.
And we're kind of our standard strands. We've got Sobotka detail, we've got the Doc's business, we've got a little bit of the Greeks, and we also have who else do we have? I think there's a little bit of Omar as well in there. Omar and Brother Mouzone also have their own little strands, so we've got a fair bit to go over. I do warn you that the first 2 sections are going to be very long, and then we'll get into the short ones after that. So if you can bear with us for the first 2, we'll get to a better place. Okay, so
Right. Well, I'm ready when you are.
right, let's jump right in. And we'll kick things off with the Sobotka detail. So the first section with the Sobotka detail is the Sobotka detail serving warrants on the targets of their investigation. Daniels leads Bunk, Kimmi and Lester into the Pyramid Industries warehouse, but the place has been completely stripped of evidence. Greggs finds some cocaine residue in a drain. Freeman and Bunk notice the bloodstain from Gleekus' shooting. Beadie finds weapons in Eton's home. Fitz and Jimmy have a tough time subduing Sergei at his home. Herc and Carver search Nick Sobotka's home. They find drugs and cash, but Amy is in Nick's room alone. Nick is asleep at Prizzy's place. White Mike is arrested by uniform officers and protests his innocence as he's pulled away from his place. From his home, Major Valchek and FBI supervisor Amanda Reese wait for Frank Sobotka, but do not arrest him at home because they want to make it as high profile as possible. So that's a very quick fire account of all the raids at the first 2 minutes of the episode. Back at the detail office, Daniels and Russell discuss the rationale for leaving Spiros on the street. Daniels tells Russell that Vondas is reporting to someone above him, and by leaving him free, they may be able to identify the man in charge. Bunk and Freeman arrive, having learned that Gleekus is dead and that Frank's son Chester Carroll Sobotka was the murderer. Daniels angrily rings the homicide unit to find out who investigated. Daniels leaves to then confront Landsman and orders his people to start the interviews. Carver, Herc, McNulty and Fitz return to the office, and Daniels walks by without stopping to talk to them. So finally, we have Daniels being outraged at Landsman because he did not think to contact them and collected only evidence relating to the murder. Landsman apologises, but it is not enough for Daniels, who claims that even for a police department that is as backwards as the Baltimore PD, this incident takes the prize as their investigation has now been severely tampered with. Oof. Sorry, guys. That's just the first kind of bit with the Sobotka detail.
Yeah, that was colossal. I think that's the most ludicrously massive section we have ever had.
And it only covered the first, 5 minutes of the episode. So much happened in that time, particularly with all the quick cuts between different aspects of the raid, and all the different arrests and interrogations and stuff. So I guess if we quickly start off by talking about the opening scene with the raids and the way that was done.
Yeah, let's cut right back to the very beginning with our opening scene.
Yeah.
And so we start with what is quite a very similar scene to some extent with Ziggy's parking meter.
Yeah.
Where there's something that kind of snaps on and the action then begins. But obviously in Ziggy's case it was more like it was that moment of clarity, everything kind of snapped back into being.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like almost like he came out of a dream state. He had his kind of wake up call at that moment.
Yeah.
And then similarly here we have a literal wake up call with them all busting in and waking everybody up with all these raids. And it's kind of nice having the clock flick on like that and that sort of starting it all off. That was nice.
Yeah, the calm before the storm, and then along come all these raids, and I thought they were a really nice way to kick the episode off. An instant energy to the episode, and it's kind of a montage-like feel similar to the start of last episode, actually. And I really like the fact that they use Nick to bookend it. It kind of adds a nice tonal mix, and we see Amy is alone. So that perhaps shows us that his feelings towards Ziggy led him to cheat on her. Something he seems to instantly regret upon waking up. But the way it starts with Nick sleeping and waking up at the end of the scene almost feels quite nicely into the title. Like he's almost kind of dreaming about these raids when he wakes up, or his worst nightmare is coming to life, or he's perhaps becoming paranoid that this may be a reality, particularly following all the heat that the docs have been picking up recently. So I found that was quite a nice way to communicate the idea of bad dreams right from the start. So
it's a good example, on the whole, of a largely dialogue-free scene.
Yeah.
This whole opening with all of the raids and all of it, there's not a whole lot of talking going on. It's just the vision of seeing what's going on, and it's kind of similar to that. Obviously, the famous scene where all they say is "fuck."
Yeah.
Is sort of these short exchanges between people, but it's the movements they make and what they uncover and in the scene as they travel along, and how they watch each other work as they don't need to say anything. It's kind of enjoyable to watch that.
That visual policing that The Wire does very well. Yeah.
And similarly, on that kind of topic of, I suppose, camaraderie, it was nice to see Fitz and Jimmy do a raid together, even though it was just the one room, as it were.
Yeah, and a pretty physical one at that, actually. I mean, Sergei's a big guy, and they just about both of them managed to kind of tranquilize him, if that's the word, and get him on the floor. So I like the way that was done. That was a nice bit of action, so to speak.
It's quite rare we get to see our very methodical detectives being physical.
Yeah.
Actually kind of getting to grips literally with the criminals.
Definitely.
Rather than just getting to grips with them through their paper and through their wiretaps and.
Absolutely, yeah. It was nice to see that. I think that's the only time we really see McNulty really pull some weight, as it were. And it's nice to see Herc and Carver perhaps dismissed a little bit and given the shit detail, you might call it, going to Nick's house, which they assume won't have much to offer. And they're the ones that come out with the goods in the end, because they managed to pull the most important leads from the raids, finding Nick's drug money, and so I thought that was quite nice, again, feeding into the whole Kirk and Carver feeling underused and underutilized. And so I guess was it Daniels and Kima went to the pyramid, and then we had Bunk and Lester at Gleekas's at the shop where the bloodstain was, and then McNulty and Fitz doing the Sergei thing. Yeah, so that was quite a nice mix there.
Yeah, it was good.
And I thought it's probably worth mentioning as well, I really like the intro scenes as of late, because they really do feel like different scenes, because sometimes The Wire plays the show so straight that the intro kind of just feels like another scene of the show. And the last few have really felt like something unique and memorable. Press's montage, McNulty's Bender, the kind of the street shootout. So it's nice that they're really kind of setting these apart and making it a nice, stylish intro.
They're capitalising on that opening spot, aren't they?
Yeah.
I guess they want to make a bigger deal out of it, and there's no, unfortunately, no matter what your thoughts may be on it, based on its effect overall on television, it is true that people are more likely to be hooked by an episode if it has an opening that's somewhat more iconic in relation to the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
Because I guess this is season 2, and they're still trying to keep the viewership going up. Although the viewership for season 2 was pretty good, wasn't it? I seem to think when it first came out. I'm not really sure how the ratings were throughout the whole running of the season, because obviously, I mean, I didn't watch it when it was very first on.
What I do know, I think, is that this episode and the penultimate episode of season 3 are the only two that received critical acclaim. So they were nominated, I think, for some awards, not BAFTA level awards or anything like that, but they were noticed for being of merit, unlike any other episodes in the show. So I think it certainly received attention from that side of things.
Yeah.
I don't think we're too genned up on the viewership, are we? We can certainly look that up and see how things changed between the seasons.
But it seemed to me like when you mention it like that, it just reminded me that possibly it's a move on the part of the screenwriters, whoever is doing it each episode, and perhaps encouraging them to do something that might bring in a more immediate viewership. They might see the start of it and be more drawn in. So I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, it's true, because I think later on the opening scenes can be very routine, like they're just another scene within a big bunch of scenes, and that's kind of The Wire's style. The Wire, as we were talking about with Breaking Bad, with Better Call Saul even, the Wire doesn't draw attention to the way it does style in the way that other shows do, so that's kind of a byproduct of it. So it's good to see that here, and it keeps these scenes memorable.
Yeah.
I guess we can move on to the bit with the small bit with Valchek in the back of the FBI car, kind of staking out Frank Sobotka.
Yeah, so I mean, after we have Nick waking up from his bad dream, and then it's the opening credits, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And then we turn up on Frank Sobotka's doorstep as he opens up the paper to see Ziggy's face.
Yeah.
Obviously, he knows exactly what that's all about. And then we see that Valchek himself is on stakeout.
Yeah.
It's not really. I'm not really sure how long he's been there. It seems kind of strange that somebody with that level of seniority is going to be on stakeout just to capture this one guy that he's going after. I mean, what should he really be doing? Isn't there other work that someone of that position has to be doing?
Oh well, there's
just speaks to Valchek's motivation.
I just love the way he kind of tips his hat as well when he appears on screen and sort of gives that awfully smug smile as they pull off.
Like he knows he's going to get to be the one who puts Frank in those handcuffs, and he does.
They're waiting for him to get to work before they move in for their big media heavy moment. It's pretty grim stuff. But I did like the scene in general. You kind of have Sobotka leaves his house and kind of strolls down his suburban street in the morning sunshine, which I thought was a nice contrast with him walking at the end towards the docks, or the end of the jetty where he was going to meet his death. So that was kind of good to see. And when he looks at the newspaper and sees Ziggy in there, little does he know that he's going to be in tomorrow's paper as a dead man. So it's a lot of awful things about to happen, really.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hang on, the bit about... Oh, no, sorry. I'm going to edit this out as well, because I was just trying to think of... Because that bit in the recap that you gave was so long that I can barely remember some of the stuff that was in it.
It was just such a... Basically, it includes the bit...
But I remember it had the Valchek bit in it, yeah.
So we've done the Valchek bit. The only two scenes we've got left in this bit are the bit where they're back at the office and they're discussing the newspaper with Chester, Carol, Sobotka and stuff, and then the bit with Landsman, and then we're on to the next bit, so...
Yeah. So it was back at the office. They're talking about leaving Spiros on the street, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. Or they just realised that there is someone above Spiros at this late stage. That shows you how well insulated the Greek has kept himself up until now. And it was only this scare that brought him down a little bit to the level where the police could actually identify him, or at least identify him as a presence. So...
I like how Daniels sort of equips his gun when he hears the news, when he hears the news about Ziggy, and he kind of clips his gun on as if he's going to war. But I think that when he arrives, and we see the scene with Landsman later on, he seems a little bit more, maybe not forgiving, but he certainly doesn't seem like he's going to make all hell break loose like he was when he arrived, and he speeds off when McNulty and Herc and Carver and they all arrive.
Yeah.
And we literally hear his car like screeching off into the distance for the whole time that it takes him to walk in. Just really emphasising the fact that he's rushing off and he's all mad. And then when he gets there, we don't quite see him like blow up or anything.
He does get very, very angry. But yeah, it's nice to see how Herc and Carver are again kind of completely blanked by Daniels on the way out. Unintentional neglect yet again, not just because they're not valued as police, but just because he's very frustrated at that moment for very, very justifiable reasons. But it again brings Herc and Carver closer to breaking point, as we're about to see in the next episode. And it's nice to finally learn Ziggy's real name as well. I don't think anyone would have guessed it would be Chester Carroll, but it's cool to see that.
Well, I think we can maybe see why he wanted to be known as Ziggy.
Yeah.
As somebody who's normally the butt of all the jokes would have got away with even less if they were called Chester Carroll.
Yeah, I don't see how that would have gone down well at Dolores' bar.
Yeah, certainly it would have been an object for ridicule considering the environment.
Yeah. So I guess the final bit here is when Daniels arrives at Landsman, or in the homicide department, to give Landsman a dressing down. And I was just reminded by the fact that Landsman occasionally does catch a murder as an investigator, and I'm intrigued as to how he might go about that. But we do see that he has some level of tunnel vision, kind of years of similar cases keeping him from thinking about things in wider contexts, and only perhaps thinking about the murder, as we see, just not considering how this relates to wider policing issues. And
it's really kind of hard to say without knowing more about the job.
Yeah.
In reality, to really, put a number, or well, you can't, but I mean, really kind of point to a really specific amount of blame that Landsman can take for that, because he's not on the detail or anything like that. So the only thing that could have triggered him on that was probably him intentionally looking for a connection, or him just taking the name Sobotka, and like you say, he's just grinding it through as a murder. He just doesn't really think about the wider context of it. But like you say, maybe because of all the amount of work that he's dealing with, there should be amount of forgiveness there because of that. So I don't know enough about the job of detective or sergeant in that kind of position to say exactly how realistic it should be that he should definitely know that and have reported it straight away.
Yeah, definitely.
So I like the ambiguity of the blame there. I thought it was kind of nice.
That is good, although you can see that Landsman is genuinely very regretful, so it looks like
definitely
perhaps something that most officers would have picked up on at the time, and he just neglected in this moment. So
I kind of like these rare moments of Landsman humility.
Yeah.
Like there's that one later on when he's like lamenting the death of one of their officers. He's kind of talking about it was
Ray Cole's wake, is it?
Right. Yeah. Is it Ray
I think
Cole's?
there's 3 wakes during the show. There's one in season 3, 4, and 5. I think Ray.
No. I think it's Forster's.
Oh, Forster, that's season 4. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Forster's. It's that one.
Yeah, okay.
Because I remember he talks about him there, and it's like a moment of real humility for Landsman. He kind of gets a little bit emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the time he's sort of, he's Jay Landsman.
He's a walking, talking kind of punning machine, I guess, isn't he? Or just kind of a witting machine, a wittery machine. So it's nice that
constantly looking for a way to break others.
Yeah, through a very elaborate use of language. So it's nice that he does occasionally become a human being. And kind of come down to earth. So we've seen quite a lot of that recently from him, and that's very, very good to see. And I guess that kind of covers the first quarter of the episode, actually, which is very, very frenetic in general. Lots of raids, lots of arrests, and lots of quick-fire interrogations. So apologies for the very lengthy section there, but I just had to kind of get that all out the way. And now we'll move on to the next bit with the Sobotka detail.
Okay.
And that includes most of the interrogation, well, all of the interrogation stuff. So firstly, we have the bit where Sobotka arrives at work and begins to discuss what to do about Ziggy before the FBI storm into the Union offices in force. Sobotka and Horseface calmly accept their arrest as Valchek gloats, and then Reese delays taking them outside until the press arrive properly. And then we have the interrogations. Herc and Carver can't get a name from Eton. Beadie and Greggs receive nothing but abuse from Ilona, who's the madam. McNulty and Fitz also fail to get a name from Sergei. And again, there's another Boris gag that comes up. The FBI interrogates Sobotka and asks him to give them information to help himself and his union. Sobotka is disgusted by their suggestion that they want to help his dying union. Sobotka's lawyers shepherd him through a detention hearing. But the success story is White Mike. Greggs and McNulty play him recordings of his voice discussing violence and drugs and tell him that they have extensive evidence that he's a drug dealer. And then Mike gives up Eton and Sergei in exchange for some food. And Mike ties Sergei to a murder but knows nothing about any of the superiors. Daniels meets with the detectives to discuss these interviews. McNulty reports the success with White Mike. Greggs reports that Nick is still at large. And Daniels asks Fitz for help in bringing in Vondas. And he tells him that with the Union figures arrested, federal interest has dissipated. Yeah.
So, yeah, all of these interrogation scenes, it's kind of interesting to see how much tougher the Greeks people are. Like, it's just, a lot of it is just silence, with the exception of White Mike, who doesn't really have any major information, but he seems to crumble quite easily because of the information they've got on him.
You don't sense that he's an insider of the Greeks organisation either, so he's not particularly emotionally attached or institutionally attached to them. He's kind of a freelancer, so it makes sense that he'd give that information up, particularly once they play him those sound files.
But Sergei, Eton, and Ilona, is it?
That's right, yeah.
All three of them, they're just like not saying anything. It's kind of funny, their stubbornness.
Yeah.
Didn't do much good in the end, but.
And we see yet again the Weebay trick of using knowledge to leverage a bit of food for your interrogation. So it's quite nice. A couple of hot dogs and some strawberry soda.
Just jumping back a little bit to the bit where Sobotka is in the office with Horseface, and obviously the FBI arrive.
Yeah.
Obviously we see how constructed the whole thing is whilst they sit them there and wait for the press to arrive. Worth noting, as I'm sure you've noticed a long time before, cameo from David Simon outside with the journalists. He's the one like leaning over the boot of the car.
That's right,
saying,
yeah.
Was it just you or was it the whole union? David Simon popping up there.
I think that's one of two cameos, right? I think he comes up again in season 5 when you see him working at the Sun, kind of writing up his stories. So.
Yeah, he's working at the Baltimore Sun at one point. He has like a pen behind his ear. I remember that's how to spot him.
Yeah, that's right. So
it's a very, very, very.
That one's a lot more
like
subtle.
really
yeah, definitely.
Are there any more? Is that the only two?
Some people say there's one each season, but I really struggled to remember any beyond that. So I guess we've got to keep our eyes peeled since we are.
I can't think where he would be in season 1.
No, I'm pretty sure he isn't in there.
Did we mention it? I don't think we did.
Yeah, I remember he plays the character of a reporter as well. He doesn't kind of mix and match characters. He plays kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, he's consistent. I mean, that's the wire for you, isn't it?
Exactly.
Even these tiny little cameos are totally consistent.
He plays himself, and he is or was a Baltimore Sun reporter, so it's all kind of what he wants to do with his actors, real character actors. And I don't.
He's barely even acting.
Basically, yeah. And I don't think there's any other times where we see reporters actually come onto the set. I mean, there is at the end of... I think Amsterdam has a big media outcry at the end, so he may well pop up in there, perhaps, but we'll have to keep our eyes peeled.
Regarding also sort of things that call forward to stuff, there's the Boris joke that we have again. And it's worth noting as well that Marlowe calls Sergei Boris as well.
Yeah.
Much later on. So that's a joke that will stand for another few seasons.
Yeah. I guess that's a fair joke. I'm not sure it really resonates with me, but I guess that's how it works. And we also see that Frank has his FBI interrogation, where the FBI really want to kind of milk the Union for their corruption case. And Frank kind of has another one of his soliloquy moments where he pours his heart out about how much help he really has received from institutions that are meant to be helping him, and refuses to cooperate in any way, shape, or form, which is consistent with his character, certainly.
So what's next?
We are on the edge. I guess there's that one bit to mention about Sergei's phone call that we mentioned as being very stupid a couple of episodes ago. Kind of comes back to haunt White Mike here.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it hasn't come back to haunt Sergei yet, but it certainly will next episode. So it kind of feels like a satisfying slam dunk at the time. But the way the phone call was set up in the stories does seem quite cheap, I think. It seems like a very, just not a very characteristic error that these guys would make. But I guess they've got to find something to catch on to.
Yeah, there are a couple of moments here and there in this season where they do take a few little liberties just to make sure that certain things within cases can get done. Which is, not totally unreasonable. Because otherwise you're constantly in the struggle of making it realistic, but also trying to make it sort of devilishly clever. But at the same time, if it's completely flawless, then it doesn't really make for an interesting story, I guess. So it's like later on when the Greek walks past Greg's and she doesn't spot it.
Yeah.
Not only do I feel like they already made that kind of point with when Herc and Carver miss Vondas, but I also feel like it was just a bit unnecessary and kind of a little bit too coincidental.
Yeah.
Especially when it was in such a mundane location. Literally just this kind of parking lot. I don't know. Didn't really make me feel the same way about it when I saw it happen to Herc and Carver.
What?
Kind of made sense there.
So it wasn't very frustrating to you that they were so close, but there was no kind of recognition. It was.
I mean, they were close, but it just didn't feel like it wasn't like they should have been paying attention. With Greg's, it was just this random thing.
Yeah, definitely.
It was quite the coincidence, and it's just there to kind of make that little point. But it didn't make me feel the same way about it as I did with Herc and Carver, because they were meant to be watching. So
it's kind of the opposite of the season 1 episode where they deliberately try and get close to Avon. And in this case, they're by coincidence they get close to their very main target who they barely know about, and they just have no clue. So it's kind of cool to see that. But I know what you mean. They're throwing all these coincidences at us to kind of frustrate us, and it might be one too many.
Certainly not without a precedent in The Wire, though.
Yeah,
Like you say, they do have all these moments where they come close and have no idea.
definitely. And before we move on to the next section, I guess this section ends with the feds tellingly dropping out of the investigation. Since their union case has closed, they've reached their corruption mandate, and anything to do with the illegal drug smuggling beyond Frank is of no interest to them. So it's kind of tragic, but it's nice to see that our band is back together as a single unit, and they're going to push ahead using their own brain power, sort of thing. So it's a nice final act for them. And part 3 is, as you were mentioning before, it's the hotel and car park stuff. So Bunker McNulty tail Vondas from his home to a meeting in central Baltimore. Greggs and Russell follow Vondas into a multi-story car park, and Beadie begins her first foot pursuit with some advice from Greggs. Despite her nerves, Beadie proves up to the task and tails Vondas to a hotel, even noting the number of the room he enters. McNulty photographs Vondas leaving the hotel with his lawyer and gets a chance shot of the Greek as he walks by. When Vondas returns to the parking garage, he switches cars and loses Greggs, who has been waiting by the car he drove in. The Greek walks by Greggs as she leaves the parking garage, still unknown to his pursuers.
So how far has Beadie Russell come? I mean, she went from the just doing it for the money and driving lazily around the port to finally doing an actual proper tailing, and she's actually got a certain knack for it as well, it seems, even though she almost blows it in the hotel hallway. Yeah, she has some real balls, and we see Greggs imparting some knowledge to her in the car park beforehand, doesn't it? Use the city is what she says. Yeah. use those reflective
That's
surfaces.
right. Of which there is a very well and obviously placed mirror to, to kind of demonstrate these skills in action.
I thought it was like a tutorial level for LA Noire or something like that.
That's a good way of putting it. Actually, it's kind of learning by process. Very obviously,
it's like flashing arrow above the mirror. Use reflective surfaces in the city to find your target. You know,
that's perfect. I was looking for the right kind of analogy, and you've nailed it right there, Alex.
The answer is always video games.
Yeah, so I thought that was a bit on the nose, but I liked how it demonstrated the growth of Beadie, and as you were saying about the lift, it's nice that you could tell she was almost going to go for the Prez option and just check what floor he ended up on, but she really went the whole hog and jumped in the lift with him at the last minute. And
brave.
Yeah, very brave. And I like how ambiguous it was whether Spiros knew right from the start, even when he turns that corner to light up the cigarette. It's not clear whether he did that just to shelter from the wind or just to catch out any pursuers. And the elevator scene is even more tense, really, from an action perspective. And not really saying much because the show doesn't really go for action normally, but it was nice to see that ambiguity throughout the whole scene. And Beadie's kind of decision process was very clear to us.
And Spiros at one point does kind of make a glance over his shoulder, and you do feel like she's getting a little bit reckless.
Yeah.
After she comes out of the lift.
Particularly when she follows him out at the last minute as well. It's like, did you really go over the top there one bit? But I think she got away with it. So.
He got the number of the door, and they're all waiting outside.
Definitely. There's not a lot that Spiros could have done either, because he couldn't have gone into a fake room to throw her off the scent. It's not like he has access to them, so it's he kind of just had to play along with it.
And then, of course, there's the chance shot of the Greek as well, who happens to be in shot with that McNulty, who is taking pictures.
Yeah.
And they're talking about what kind of suits they're wearing, aren't they? There's a long conversation about suits and designers.
That's kind of following on from that's right, from their initial
Which
discussion.
follows on from when they were talking about it earlier, when they first see him, when they first see Vondas in his fancy suit.
And that's a great exchange, actually, with the grown-up who pays attention.
Yeah, that's a good response from Bunk.
Absolutely. Putting McNulty right in his place. And being able to identify a designer from buttons. Bunk's clearly a very distinguished gentleman. Yes, it's good overall. I did like the symmetry of the pursuer and and Spiros both rested on a corner. Beadie in the hotel and Spiros out on the street, which was quite nice. See the symmetry there.
Yeah, that's nice.
And odd to see.
The very final bit is just with the Greek going past as well.
That's right, yeah.
Which we mentioned already. Greg's obviously just not paying attention, just dealing with the barrier or whatever, and Greek just strolls past.
Definitely, it was definitely a bit perhaps obvious when he walked right past Greg as she came out, but I did like the second part of that scene where we see the Greek gradually working his way into the car park, and he really does. He's walking as a silhouette in the shadows, with the car gradually kind of fading into the distance. So it's a really nice kind of imagery of how under the shadows and under the radar the Greek really is. So I quite enjoyed that, and it's just good to see Spiros and the Greek in an environment where they're actually spending their riches. Expensive suits, hotels, downtown Baltimore hangouts makes a big change from the down at heel Johnny's Diner, where we've seen them spend most of the season.
Yeah, we're seeing a very different side to the Greeks here for sure, especially now that they have left that diner and it really feels totally closed off and they're never going back, and as a result their desire for expensive stuff has followed suit because they're no longer in that environment where they're incognito.
Yeah.
Now they can be sort of comfortable with themselves and flash their cash.
Definitely.
But it's actually somewhat to their detriment here.
Certainly.
Because they're going to stand out a lot more. And they do.
Yep. It's one swanky manoeuvre too many.
So yeah, that's that little section. What's next?
Yeah. So, next up, we have our final Sobotka detail strand. And Daniels meets with Perlman to discuss the case. They have identified Vondas' lawyer as Stephen Rados, and have even got an address for him because he rented the hotel room. However, they still believe he may be in charge of the smuggling ring. Daniels asks what they can offer White Mike in exchange for his cooperation, and Perlman suggests witness protection seeing as they have the feds involved. Beadie asks why Sobotka has not been offered the same thing. Beadie suggests that Sobotka would talk if she approached him, and Perlman gives her the okay. Monk and McNulty wait for Vondas at his home to no avail. Herc and Carver do the same thing for Nick.
So, this is, I just remember from this bit we have Beadie complaining that White Mike is going to be able to walk and get his witness protection, as it were, for giving up that information. I guess that stems in somewhat to the FBI's lack of interest in the drug side of things. They're quite happy to let a drug dealer go as long as they get a bit more about their terrorism, as it were, and the union stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very close-minded, yeah. It's just, again, good to see Beadie getting on her soapbox. She's been very much a kind of trodden voice, I think, for a lot of the season, and she's really, crafting what the detail does now, and she's strategizing herself. She came up with the whole I talk to Sobotka thing, and that was playing on her own strengths. She has that relationship with Sobotka that she can exploit at this moment.
It's very clear that it's not going unnoticed, especially by Daniels, who we see quite a few glances and from his direction, and she leads the conversation. She sort of punctuates other people's sentences with her own information. So yeah, it's she's clearly sort of come into a league of her own here.
Definitely, and I love the sense here of there being, on the verge of taking the investigation to the final chapter. They're going it alone without the FBI. They're on the cusp of reaching right up to the top of the organisation. And the most notable aspect of it is Beadie, the whole demeanour changing. So it's great to see. I feel like Beadie is perhaps dropped, though. Like, she's very much a Season 2 character. She's there throughout 3, 4 and 5, but this development they've shown of her throughout the season kind of just collapses after this, unfortunately. She becomes a bit of a side character. And a plot device for McNulty to settle down, perhaps, if I'm being a bit harsh. It's kind of frustrating to think about that as the future, as we know the show in hindsight, that this never really goes anywhere, ultimately. But it's good to see it.
In regards to why, do you think it's possible that Amy Ryan maybe sort of had work commitments in other areas and maybe couldn't commit to the show to the same extent that they might have wanted her to? I mean, certainly considering on the strength of her character and the way she's brought up in this season, I think you're right. I think it is frustrating not to see her more often, because we suddenly get used to this character, and yet she exists almost exclusively in Season 2 as a part of the main ensemble.
Yeah.
It feels like there was far more mileage, far more kind of ability for her to go full-on detective, and that never really happens, which is a bit of a disappointment, really.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's a number of reasons for why. I wouldn't like to be able to say we don't know, but I mean, I can't imagine they'd have been able to fit anything else into the show. We always talk about how every scene in The Wire matters, and there's not anything really missing. And David Simon struggled to get as many episodes as he did in the first place, so I guess some characters do have to be sidelined, and we saw that a lot in Season 5 when people like Cutty and Colvin were axed from the show, really. Well, I think they had their cameo moments in Season 5, but there were a few strands that just seemed to come to an end prematurely, so they could fit all the newspaper things in that they wanted to with their 10 episodes.
Yeah, can't have it all, I guess.
Yeah. Nope. Yep, so anything else you want to say about the Sobotka detail, or should we go on to our doc stuff?
No, I think we can move on, yeah. Move on to the docs.
Right, okay, so there's another 4 here. There are 4 shorter sections here. So firstly, Nick returns home to find his mother and father cleaning up their house. Neither of them will speak to him at first. Eventually, Louis tells his son that the police have a warrant for him at the Southeastern District. As soon as he's released, Frank visits Ziggy in prison. Ziggy has been beaten by the other inmates. He asks his son to explain what happened, and Ziggy says that he was tired of always being a punchline. Frank asks why Ziggy didn't come to him, and Ziggy tells him he was too busy with his union stuff. Ziggy asks if his mother knew he is in prison. Ziggy confesses remorse for shooting the store clerk. Ziggy tells his father that they are not the same, and Frank assures him that he is a true Sobotka. Ziggy simply tells Frank that he is fucked, and leaves the room.
That's really, really very tragic scene with Frank and Ziggy. Maybe one of the best in the whole episode, I think.
Yeah.
Apparently, the recap for this episode on the HBO website says something along the lines of Ziggy sort of finds out that he's not Frank's biological son or something. I don't know if they've corrected it.
Well,
but I was reading
right.
a piece about this episode on the internet, and it said something along the lines that the HBO recap about it must have been wrong, because it said that it was some kind of revelation where he found out he wasn't his biological son, even though that's not what's happening at all. He's sort of saying it metaphorically.
I would have said metaphorically, definitely, but if that is canon with the HBO website officially, then that adds a nice weird element to it.
They could have got it wrong, though.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. I assume it's not written by David Simon personally, so I guess we can never know for sure. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that, you know, if Chester was adopted or anything like that. But don't know why I'm calling him Chester, but it's kind of weird. He does disown him, doesn't he? He tells him that we're not of the same blood, and then we get a nice Sobotka-y punchline of "You're Sobotka." So it's I guess there's a bit of ambiguity there.
Yeah, whilst you're doing that, I just quickly checked on the HBO website for that episode, and it appears that it no longer says that. So
really? Oh right, okay.
Yeah, I retract that. But of course, the article I was reading said that it said that at the time. So I thought that was unusual, because didn't feel that way to me.
No, it just seems too complicated, doesn't it? But there are a few things that are apparently canon in the universe. Like, I keep hearing frequently that Randy Wagstaff is Cheese Wagstaff's son, and that was something that David Simon was going to develop at some point in season 4, but never got around to it. I don't know if you kept hearing that. They certainly have the same surname.
Yeah, I mean, the surname is a bit of a giveaway, I suppose, but it's I wouldn't base it purely on that.
I feel like that would have been one link too many as well in a universe where there's a fair few coincidences. That would have. But yeah, there's a few things I guess that aren't quite clear, which is nice in many ways. And it's nice to see the threat that's luring through the door in the prison. All those guys, and it's pretty grim to see Ziggy wander back into that mess and already getting pushed around from his.
He disappears right into the throng, doesn't he? Like, feels like he's this very small person amongst all these giants. Like, just disappears in amongst all these very threatening bodies, and we don't see much more of Ziggy after that at all.
No, that's pretty much the end of his time on the show. Again, that's a very good arc, and we don't really need to see him again, but it's nice to see that, and it's fantastic to see James Ransom again pulling it out of the bag, big time. Incredibly versatile this season, I think, playing the Joker most of the time, but being able to really bring it when there's these big emotional outbursts at the end.
Yeah.
And I guess we also should mention the very short bit where Nick returns home to a disgraced father and mother. It's odd because there's a big scene of Nick approaching the house and looking around the neighbourhood. And Nick certainly senses that something is different with the neighbourhood. Although women...
Yeah, everyone's there sort of stood on their stoops and watching him. And
yeah.
He seems very aware that people are talking about him.
That must be it, yeah. I mean, we're meant to assume that he's come straight from, is it Prissy's house, I think?
Yeah.
So maybe if he did have a dream about some sort of raid going down, perhaps that's what's playing on his mind right now, or maybe it is, there's a different atmosphere now that the raid has occurred. So it's good to see that they're drawing attention to that.
Yeah, that was nice.
Okay, so our second section with the docs is Frank meeting with his brother Louis. Louis regrets not spending more time looking out for their children. Frank says that he could never control Ziggy and wouldn't have been able to stop him from doing what he did. Louis says he was speaking of Nick. Frank tries to reassure Louis that Nick is only involved in some theft. Louis shows Frank the search warrant and tells him that Nick was involved in drugs. Louis is outraged that Frank did nothing to stop Nick when he was still involved in capers at the docks rather than serious crime like drug dealing. Frank tells Louis that the theft from the docks was always a means to sustain their way of life. Louis tells him that should never justify what they allowed to happen to their sons, and leaves Frank alone at the table.
Yeah, Frank gets quite the talking to here, and I think Louis lays it down very well when he says that if they were going to give them a taste of that money from the crime, they weren't suddenly going to turn straight. I thought that was a good way of putting it, is that although it may have sustained their way of life, it's put them on a completely different track, and it's not going to suddenly end with them finding that stability that they were looking for. It's only going to lead to having an incredibly chaotic life. And in Ziggy's position, chasing that money and chasing those deals has ended up putting him in prison for murder. So,
yeah, Louis certainly proves himself to be smart and knows that crime is a slippery slope better than Frank does, and that you start somewhere, you'll end up somewhere else. So it was, Frank was being very heavily judged here. I don't know whether it was justified or not, but it was good to see him getting a talking to. And it really felt like it addressed a lot of the season's major issues over moral ambiguity and the road to hell being paved with good intentions, and whether it's ever justified to do these things. So it was nice to see the.
I mean,
sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, let's not forget that Frank, has been incredibly dishonest throughout the whole season. I mean, and he still continues to be quite dishonest here when talking about the situation with Louis. So, it's justified, like you say, because of his intention supposedly being good, and it's always about dealing with other people and trying to help other people's situation. But as we see later on, especially when he goes to work in the docks himself and starts doing some unloading, you get the sense that he sees a more macro state of the docks, and how his ideas of him getting the grain pier or whatever, these big pie in the sky ideas, they're too big picture. He kind of loses. I think I mentioned before how he gets this tunnel vision, and he just focuses so much on this one individual idea that he's got, and he just loses what is actually majorly important in the wide sphere of things. I suppose you might say. And he continues to be quite dishonest about a lot of things just to get his way.
Yeah.
Even though the end result is helping other people, he has been very selfish, and I think it's important that Louis here does give him quite a dressing down.
You certainly need the voice from the other side of the tracks to really draw attention to that, to the conflict with the character. And it's good that it makes Louis perhaps the only morally clean character in the docks, really, in the dock strand. He's the innocent person. But
it's clearly a very principled man.
It makes him a fairly narrow and uninteresting character on the whole. But these scenes where he does pop up are a really nice contrast. They're dark, frothy beers in the kind of dimly lit kitchen. There's a couple of these scenes where we almost feel like Frank is meeting his maker. He's kind of being judged at the gates of wherever.
So we're going on to our next section here, are we?
So Frank goes into work and Nat Coxon refuses to look at him. Frank borrows Little Big Roy's union card so that he can work a ship while Little Big Roy gets paid for sitting in a bar. He tells the shift supervisor Phil that he and Little Big Roy are essentially the same, bald and Polish. The stevedores are bemused by Frank's desire to work, but Nat gives a grudgingly respectful nod. Frank goes to work a hard shift unloading ships.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, he turns up here and he's unloading the ships, and I think he says something about them needing a forklift.
Yeah.
And I think Nat sees... I feel like he makes quite a knowing look to Frank in that he wants to do all of this large-scale stuff like the grain pier, but there's actually smaller problems that are affecting the workers on normal day-to-day work, and that you can't expect to solve all of the problems with one master stroke or something like that.
Yeah.
The job isn't that simple. And that Nat is seeing things on this scale that Frank is not. And his desire to stay on, and to stay on as a union leader, is having that impact. And then when he has to unload the truck himself, he sees that it's not that easy. Yeah,
that's true. Perhaps losing grip with the day-to-day realities, definitely. That's a good point. I did like the scene in general. I think The Wire was perhaps at some of its most sentimental here. With Frank really doing his last day on the docks, or sensing that he'll do his last day doing what he loves. The idea of the one for all for one. We're all bored and we're all Polish, and desperately sad. Really, the only reason he's doing this is because he believes he's right on the edge of not death perhaps, but being outed. The heat is just getting too close. A nice parallel drawn as Frank works real stevedore work, physical work, treasures every minute of it. And this is interspersed with scenes of the cops doing their stakeout on the Greek, which is very physical, real police work, so to speak. And they're loving every minute of it as well, particularly seeing Beadie grow. So I like the fact that they were kind of really celebrating the process of physical police work there side by side, which was nice. So
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Nice to see that Little Big Roy is the tiny guy and Big Roy isn't. I don't know what the story there is, but it must be hilarious. And let's not forget.
It's another inside joke with the stevedores. This time we're not privy to its creations.
Yeah. And it was
another mystery.
It was important enough to have had the season's opening epigraph, of course, Little Big Roy, if we can remember back. So he's
of course.
He's clearly a minor but major character in ways. And we also, I think Frank's fat suit is quite obvious here now that the summer weather is out. What's his name? Frank Sobotka's actor. It's escapes me now at the moment, but he wore a fat suit throughout the show to embody his character a little bit more.
Oh really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
He did. I think it's a bit less obvious when he's wearing the normally quite big bulky coats out on the docks. But you can kind of see it a bit more obviously here when he's wearing this t-shirt under his high-vis jacket. But yeah, he wore a fat suit to look a little bit more of the type of character they wanted to make. He's actually quite a thin guy in real life, actually, I believe. I do know his name. I'm just blanking, I'm afraid.
It's Chris Bauer.
Chris Bauer, bang on. There we go. So, yeah, thought of mentioning that.
All right. Yeah, I never even realised that he wore a fat suit. To be honest with you.
Yeah.
Never spotted it.
Well, there you go.
Fooled me.
And finally, our final dock business moment. So after a hard shift unloading the ships, Frank meets with his lobbyist Bruce DiBiago. Bruce tells him that all of their political machinations have been reversed by the arrest. With the FBI involved, politicians are afraid to vote for Frank's suggestions because they have accepted money from him. Frank is dismayed, and as Bruce leaves, he tells him that the problem with their country is that they used to make things, but now they just put their hands in the next man's pocket.
So this is Frank receiving yet more bad news. I think, although whilst we had Nick supposedly having this bad dream at the start, I think Frank is living his bad dream. Because he's just getting bad news after bad news in this episode, and it continues here with his complete failings politically, now that his involvement with the FBI has scuppered any chance of having any credibility with any of these politicians.
Yeah.
So it's just another massive blow to Frank's campaign here. And this is another moment, similarly to earlier, where he's talking about how disgusted he is to now be supposedly receiving help. That he talks about the state of America, and that, as he says, they're not making anything anymore. It's just all about the money exchanging hands in the right way.
And I know that that's a very popular favourite quote from the show as well. It certainly gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? And it kind of stands in as Frank's final soliloquy. I mean, he's had plenty where he really pours his heart out about the state on the docks, and this is the final and perhaps most cutting one. And he really gets one over on Bruce, you sense here with that statement. It really does cut deep for Bruce as well.
Yep. Yeah, like you say, this is the very last one, really.
Yeah.
Lots of passionate Frank moments. It's all about to come to a big close.
Yeah. And do you get the sense that when we're checking in with Bruce, it feels like he's been finding a legitimate excuse to tell Frank that no one cares about the grain pier, dredging from the start. But now with the police interference, he's got something to blame the lack of interest on. I get the sense that there was always that kind of futility to it from the start, because it's just kind of certainly got that sense from it when he's been meeting with him in previous scenes. There's always this kind of hesitance from Bruce to take the money.
Yeah, I think I get what you mean. Yeah. So is that the end of our doc
That's
business?
right. Yeah. It ends with the scene where Frank kind of gets to pass judgment himself rather than be judged by everyone else, which seems to be what happens this episode. So
yeah,
we now move on to the Greeks, who have just one little section involving a meal. So the Greek meets with Vondas for dinner, and Vondas is too worried to eat. They decide to leave Baltimore because the investigation is closing in on them. The Greek asks Vondas to tie up the loose ends. Vondas is reluctant to kill the Sobotkas and suggests they could guarantee their loyalty by offering to help Ziggy. Vondas could persuade the witness to Glikas' shooting to change his story. The Greek realizes that Vondas is fond of Nick in particular and tells him he should have a son of his own. So
another restaurant extravagance scene with the Greeks here. They're spending their money at last.
Yeah.
The Greek, again, continuing to be incredibly sinister by just saying that there's really only one way to guarantee that they'll be silent. And he is somewhat persuaded by Vondas in the end, and that he could guarantee it another way, and that we find out obviously it's the deal to help Ziggy. But yeah, there's more sinister stuff from the Greek, and this is followed up by the joke that they make that about him. She should have had a son. I think we do kind of get that sense that Vondas is quite fond of Nick. When we see later on when they're sat on the bench, he's kind of, I don't know, he's kind of mollycoddling him in a way like a son.
Definitely, yeah.
So they make a joke about that, and then he says that he would have had to have had a wife. So that would have been the downside to him.
Definitely, yeah. He can't really adopt Nick at this stage. I really like the spirit in this episode. I totally agree with you on the sinister stuff with the Greek. It's pretty cutting to see him suggest that they need to be dealt with, and that they never utter the word murder or kill. But I don't really know what word they use for it in this conversation. But it's not nice to hear it. But it is heartwarming to see Spiros fight their corner, and with a pretty genius plan to jostle with the witness. And it's nice that the Greek acknowledges his fondness for Nick in particular, and we see Spiros turning softer.
Yeah, we see do see a rather strange soft side to Vondas here, especially at this stage when we're supposed to be getting close to capturing him.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be bringing a lot of these different sides to the Greeks out.
I felt that it was weird that the Greek settled for Spiros' plan so easily, though. He said it himself, the only way to really guarantee it is to silence them. But perhaps it suggests his respect for Spiros. Spiros is the second man in the operation, and we need to consider his needs and wants as well. So it was good to see that relationship between the top two guys in the institution.
Very different to the Avon Stringer relationship.
Oh yeah. So do you have Avon? Because Avon's the emotional one, isn't he? In their relationship. And then,
it's like a flipping of the roles, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. So
Vondas, the second in command, who's the sort of parallel to Stringer, he's now the emotional one, and the Greek is cold and calculated and just does everything as it needs to be through the business. And it's like it's interesting how they draw that parallel but flip it.
Yeah, no, that's very, very nice actually, definitely. Stringer is always business over emotion, isn't it, with Stringer, and then emotion over business in some cases with Avon, I'd say, is probably the way of putting it. So
he just cares a lot about his rep.
Yeah, but
how he is talked about and how he is considered by others is vital.
But there is also compassion for others as well. Like his family is a very important thing for him.
Yeah, family, loyalty.
I think that's kind of the link with Nick here, really. Yeah. So. So that's a really nice scene, and I do like that link to Avon and Stringer. It feels really, really nicely done. So we have a couple more sections. We have Omar and Brother Mouzone, who have their own little isolated story here. That is slightly bizarre, but let's dive in. So Omar meets with Stringer at Butch's bar. Butch's nephew Haywood provides protection for Omar. Perry is there to act as Stringer's bodyguard. Stringer tells Omar that Brother Mouzone was solely responsible for torturing Brandon in order to build his rep. Stringer offers to give up Mouzone if Omar will cease his pursuit of the Barksdales.
So that first little bit there, Omar arrives with a bunch of absolutely massive guys.
Yeah.
Kind of pinpoints how small he is in comparison.
And Omar ain't no small guy. Yeah.
But he said, I like the way he says something like, "Oh, that ain't going to work for Omar." In the way he kind of always talks about himself in the third person.
Yeah, he's got that level of importance that he carries with himself.
Yeah, he's got that level of self-confidence and swagger coming into the meeting. But as we expect, Stringer comes in with a plan, And Omar is quite quickly hypnotized by Stringer, it seems, and in his tale of Brother Mouzone and what he supposedly did to Brandon. I mean, Omar seems such a perceptive guy, someone whose entire sort of survival and success has come out of being able to pick up on all these small details like the secret knock later on. And yet he doesn't really seem to see through Stringer here. Stringer fools him hook, line, and sinker, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. It is strange to see that. I guess you could. The only way of justifying it really is to say that it's all to do with the emotional turmoil of, bringing back Brandon into his mind, and for that reason he fell for the manipulation. But I do have trouble believing that Omar really fell for it. So
I'm not sure what reason he has to believe Stringer, but like you say, in the heat of the moment, especially bringing up a subject that we've not really heard too much about and being brought from way back in season 1, it's possible that he just lost himself in the moment a little bit.
Definitely, and particularly because
it does seem. I mean, I use the word hypnotized quite deliberately. That's the way it kind of seemed.
Stringer's speaking patter is hypnotic in itself, isn't it? That kind of those soft tones.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to just kind of slowly remind him of all these little facts and then dropping it with, it's Brother Mouzone. You must listen to my voice. You must go and get Brother Mouzone. I am not the person that you want to be dealing with.
Definitely, yeah.
So it's very clever from Stringer, but it only postpones the inevitable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe makes it a lot worse.
Yeah, well, I guess ultimately this scene is Stringer sealing his fate, isn't it? If you go back enough steps.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely it is.
So it's it's very, very interlinked. But it's just odd that he brings this up now. Like, it's more than a year after. There's been no obvious impetus, unless Omar has been stalking the project as he often does, seeing that Mouzone is keeping everyone at bay in the towers. You'd have thought he may have the insight to look and see that there's more to it than just Brandon. But yeah, there we go. So let's see how this relates to the next section, where Omar follows Stringer's tip and finds Lamar guarding Brother Mouzone's hotel room. He watches Lamar to learn the coded knock he is using. Omar uses Kimmi, Tasha, and a dog to distract Lamar after seeing him watching a dog earlier. This dog being Butch's dog, who's very fond of Omar. Omar knocks out Lamar as he strokes the dog, and then shoots Brother Mouzone in the stomach as he answers the door. Omar explains why he is there, and Mouzone tells Omar that he's mistaken. Omar believes Mouzone's story and leaves him in the motel room. He phones for an ambulance on his way out.
This scene, as kind of cool as it is, it did remind me somewhat that Brother Mouzone is, I don't know, a lot of his character rests more on moments like that good, bad, and the ugly bit in the last episode, where he has his little speech there talking about his gun and his that he's got loaded with a round in the chamber. He kind of lives on those moments, but as a character, I just find him a bit kind of not all that interesting. The way he just kind of barks at Lamar all the time is a bit boring. What is it, Lamar? It's just kind of, what is this?
I thought that was hilarious, actually. I loved when Lamar offers Mouzone some titty mags if he got a need. It's just like Mouzone seems so distant from the world of titty mags that the suggestion alone is hilarious. And
he just seems like such a weird character. He doesn't fit in the world of The Wire somehow. It just feels all wrong. He feels like too much of a caricature.
Definitely. I mean, the combo of him with Lamar... Lamar seems bizarre and absurd as well in comparison to Mouzone, but that's only because Mouzone is so bizarre. He fits quite well into the world of The Wire, but forcibly contrasting them together as kind of a mentor and a leader or whatever is kind of hilarious. So I enjoy their little banters they have together.
I'm not sure how much mentoring Lamar thinks he's getting from Brother Mouzone. He seems like he doesn't give a shit to me. Just feeding dogs and just like whatever.
Must be getting a nice little wad from all his magazine duties.
And then he's obviously knocked out very thoroughly, very efficiently by Omar using, I'm not sure what.
Some sort of baton, It's the first time we've seen Omar lurking in the shadows for a while. Not since season 1 have we seen that waned.
It's nice that Lamar kind of bends down to reveal the silhouette of Omar in the distance around the corner. And then obviously moves in, shoots Brother Mouzone.
Yeah.
And again is convinced by Brother Mouzone. He's able to tell that he's able to tell that he's telling the truth, but he's not able to tell that String is lying. So again, I don't know. The emotion comes into play there, but he tries to do the right thing as he leaves, which is again sort of this idea of Omar. You know, a man has got to have a code, and his code here is not just to leave Mouzone dying, which is sort of nice of him, I suppose, to call an ambulance.
Yeah.
So giving him a chance rather than just leaving him there to die.
Definitely.
Well, the thing is, he was the one that shot him in the first place.
Yeah.
So
he saw that he did a
a
wrong
very
deed.
strange moment, that's for sure.
I mean, it's absurd that Omar fell into this trap in the first place, but it's also pretty absurd that Mouzone could be got like this in the first place as well.
Especially seeing as he's supposed to be untouchable.
Yeah, exactly. I think it works both ways, that the meeting of these two absurdist characters leaves many questions unanswered on both fronts. So
Yeah, it fits what we know, or maybe what we don't know about them.
Yep.
But it does seem somewhat contrary to this great description we've had of Mouzone so far, that nobody can come anywhere near him. And Omar waltzes in quite easily and gets a shot off, and he could have killed him if he wanted to very, very easily.
I did enjoy the bit where...
What is it, Lamar? I just hear that, and I'm just like, oh, God.
I remember the bit where Mouzone just barks the code of the street. The game is the game.
Yeah, the game is the game.
That's the first thing you say after you get shot, right?
That was the best take they had of that, by the way. That was the take that they used.
Oh dear, I found that.
Maybe he's meant to be this sort of weird robotic character, because supposedly, I mean, there's this whole deal about his faith here, and that he is meant to be, it's like Nation of Islam?
I think so. There's certainly allusions to it.
It's like a sort of far-right support group or whatever in North America. But yeah, so I don't know, maybe that's the whole point. He's meant to be this kind of robotic guy who just has his faith instead, and that's that. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. And you're right, these two surreal characters having this surreal moment together, in a weird way, it kind of makes sense and raises more questions than it answers.
Definitely, particularly when we now see what it means for Stringer, who's achieved nothing but making two enemies of very feared muscle. Both Omar and Mouzone have turned against him as of now, and this will come to loggerheads in Season 3. And
it feels like they're the perfect characters of mythology in a way, I suppose. In terms of the show and the street, in relation to reality, it having this mythology to it.
yeah,
Those are two characters to represent that. In a way, it is meant to be larger than life, because that's what makes real mythology. That's what makes word on the street travel, is these genuinely bizarre things.
It's a lovely way of looking at it, because the word on the street is such an important part of the way the streets work. So, okay, yeah, I really like that kind of interpretation.
Because an alternative way of looking at it, because otherwise I think that both Omar and Brother Mouzone, to a much greater extent, can be quite problematic viewing sometimes if you constantly take the wire on the way that it always presents itself. Because these moments are meant to be of this manner, I guess that makes it an easier way to watch it.
Certainly, yeah.
If you're trying to be quite purist about the wire, anyway.
And the show has already made a point of mentioning Greek gods and mythology before, so it's something that has been set up, perhaps. Yeah, well, that was an interesting discussion. Should we move on to our final section, the Frank's Fate section?
Yes.
So there's 3 little subparts to this. So firstly, Frank gets a visit from Beadie at the Union Hall. She is upset and asks him to come forward as an informant to save himself. She tells him that there are different kinds of wrong and that he is better than those who he has gotten involved with. Vondas meets with an embittered Nick. He convinces Nick that he could help Ziggy and asks him to arrange a meeting with Frank. So we have the duality of the two kind of two characters consoling, their other characters really, not their inferiors necessarily.
Consoling and convincing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. This is a good parallel. Starting off with Beadie following up from her plan from earlier. And she's kind of hitting home on one of the key themes, actually, for this whole season and for Frank's arc that obviously pretty much comes to an end here, is that he is ultimately a decent individual. he had to turn to crime because of his intentions, which were ultimately good. He was a good person, but he was corrupted by this system that was, as on a whole, amoral. He was kind of forced to become that way because of the institution that he was part of.
Definitely, yeah.
This is definitely a scene with Beadie where she makes that very clear in conversation with him.
If Louis is the devil on his shoulder, then Beadie's the angel on the other one. So it's certainly weighing up both sides here. And it's nice seeing Beadie again, having really come very far. And she's doing a very, very good job of nailing this. It's not really an interrogation. It's half tactic and half genuine emotional outpour, isn't it, really? And that combination really works and gets Frank exactly where they want him to be.
And, of course, The Wire being The Wire, they use that as a moment to press forward and actually, this is pretty much what kills Frank. Him agreeing to become an informant is the information that gets passed to... what's the name of the...
Koutris, yeah.
Koutris,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the information that gets passed to Koutris.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's what gets him killed.
Yeah, so it's everything byproduct of, it's all the pieces matter, isn't it? That's what it is. And all these stars aligning at once, different scenes coming to fruition, it sorts of matters. It's tragic, but we can see why people did it. So it's nice to see again Beadie's scene with Maui. I feel there's echoes of that and how she's developed since then as well, with her policing skills. So I thought that was really nice. What did you think about the Spiros and Nick one?
As I already mentioned, there's a clear point being made about him seeing Nick in this very kind of paternal way. He's kind of like, literally touching him like a son in a way, like kind of, oh, my son, and touching on his face. This kind of like, very, very European way of doing it. So it's pointing towards that and really applying to his emotions, that he knows what he needs to get out of get out of Nick in order to help Ziggy. So again, the manipulation here and him going for the emotional side, like we mentioned before, in that duality with the Greek himself.
Yeah.
I think Nick is understandably easily convinced here because this is a moment of sheer turmoil for him and his whole family.
Definitely, yeah. But both the things that are on the table for both Frank and Nick here are very appealing towards them. They're really emotionally
Absolutely.
invested in what they're about to receive from them. So it's nice to see that. Just parallel with two characters who genuinely care about characters from other institutions who reach out and try and help them. Also, it's nice to know that one of them is trying to encourage cooperation with the law, and the other one is trying to encourage, discooperation with the law, or whatever the word is, trying to curb it. So it's nice to see that they're doing different things there.
Yeah.
And I really did like Beadie's line about there are different kinds of wrong. It felt like that would have been a good epigraph for this episode.
Yeah, it would actually.
That would have gone down quite well there. And as you were mentioning before about all these things leading to Frank's fate, it's unfortunate that both these corporations cause friction with each other and cause some real bad stuff. Both Spiros and Beadie are trying to do the right thing, but they're both doing the wrong thing from the other perspective, as it's the fact that they coincide that Frank gets killed. So it's a really weird kind of parallel here.
Well, that's the Wire all over.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before about the ambiguity of where blame lies, for example, in Landsman's case, it's not. Most of the time, it's not really there to set up some kind of ideal moral situation where it's good guys and bad guys. It's very much determined to make all these situations very subjective and really hard to analyse in a state of morality.
Yeah.
And as Beadie points out here, it's all this kind of very wide spectrum of right and wrong and all the overlaps in between. So it's not there to try and state this is wrong, this is right, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. Very clearly the Wire has put its foot down on that, and it makes no exception here, that's for certain.
Absolutely fantastic scenes. And on a bit of a lighter note, this scene also starts the tradition of the meeting in the bench in the park, which I think is mainly a mainstay of Prop Joe and Spiros, but it's a scene that works all the way through to season 5, when eventually it's Marlowe and Spiros who kind of exchange business on this bench.
Yeah, the bench features. I think the bench should be credited.
Yeah,
It's a regular feature.
it's got like a little donated plaque in the middle of it for Prop Joe. So yeah, it's a character in itself practically once we've seen enough of it. Right.
Any more sections?
Yes, we've got 2 to go. So Beadie's appeal is successful, and Frank comes in the next day. He asks for lenience for Nick and for Ziggy to be transferred to a safer prison. Pullman agrees on straight probation for Frank and Nick as long as Frank cooperates fully. Frank agrees with one condition: he will not give up on any union men. Pullman asks Frank to return with a lawyer the following day. Freeman asks Frank why he stopped using his cell phone, and he tells them that he realized it had been flagged. Nick then phones Frank at the union hall as he returns from his session at the detail office. Meanwhile, Fitz faxes a record of the meeting into the FBI headquarters. So speaking of all that moral ambiguity, is it really Fitz who sticks around with the investigation when he doesn't really need to? The FBI, his organisation, have lost interest. By sticking around, is he the one who really killed Frank there? It's all a big web of morality.
Well, again, no doubt Fitz thinks that he's doing the right thing at this stage by helping out the detail when he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
He's passing on this information. You know, he has no idea that it's Kutris, this inside man, is passing all this information along.
Yeah.
It's also nice to see Frank sticking to his guns again. He's still not going to get union guys involved, so he's staying true. And a lot of moments in this episode where we see this almost, martyrdom for the union, I suppose you could say. Like, when he spends his final day at work and he's there, he's sweating, pushing out all these boxes. He's just doing it because it's kind of a symbolic move.
Definitely, yeah.
So again, here he's not willing to give up any union guys.
It's nice that these police are motivated by the stuff that Frank is willing to give up, because that's what stopped the FBI's investigation in its tracks. Was
absolutely
Frank's lack of willingness to go near his union men. His principles are there to the end. And it is nice that Fitz is sticking around with the investigation. He clearly has a passion where the rest of his colleagues don't, and although it's continued, his continued link to the case is what's about to get him killed, as we discussed. So for me, it just seems so futile. We know that the FBI doesn't even care about this stuff. Frank kind of giving up the drug dealers. It almost feels like Fitz is doing it just in case it leads to any other leads or something like that. It kind of feels like a futile gesture, and it's what leads to such an awful downfall.
And once again, another moment of frustration as Pullman stops Frank from saying any more and asks him to come back later with the following day with a lawyer.
Yeah, that's just so.
And of course, we're like, nope, it's not going to happen.
No. Yeah. Oh god. Oh dear. Well, with that, we'll move on to our final section then. So,
okay.
Nick relates Vondas' offer of a meeting to Frank. Frank is angry with Nick for getting involved with drugs, but has taken on board Louis' criticism and is even more angry with himself. He tells Nick that he is going to talk to the police. When Nick brings up Vondas' offer of help for Ziggy, Frank reconsiders. Frank is enraged but decides to take the meeting, putting his son above his dreams for the docks. He refuses to let Nick accompany him, insisting that he will have no further dealings with the Greeks. As Frank arrives at the meeting, the Greek receives word from the inside man in the FBI, Kutris, that Frank has met with the police and agreed to become an informant. As Frank walks towards him, the Greek tells Vondas that his way will not work.
So this is another moment of slight coincidence in order to provide that really kind of dramatic stab in your heart right at the end in the fact that they change their mind and they make their new plan to kill Frank literally in the long walk that he has towards them.
Yeah.
So it's just really doubles up on the tragedy there.
Definitely.
Going back to a bit earlier on, obviously we see that Frank has taken on the criticism from Louis, as you mentioned. And is smart enough to get Nick out of there so that Nick doesn't end up a casualty as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And we then have another layer of moral ambiguity when, Frank chooses Ziggy over the docks. Is that just a product of his guilt for a lack of cooperation so far, or is it it almost seems silly to give up on his docks right at the end of the game, but then family cannot be helped. He cannot be compromised on. It's a very tricky decision for him to make on the spot. So,
well, with Frank being the impassioned man that he is, he needs to have something to fight for. He needs to have something to even die for in this sense. So, in that moment, he chooses Ziggy, I guess, perhaps, like you say, out of guilt or the fact that he can't help him any further. If he can't help him directly, maybe he can do it this way, and he figures a way to work it out. He's just panicked, I guess. He's just trying to think of something that will work, and
definitely, yeah.
In the same way that he changes his mind very quickly, so do the Greeks.
Yeah.
And he ends up worse for it.
Absolutely. And I mean, stepping back from this scene a little bit, in terms of the way it's done, the style, let's not forget that there's a big Greek song montage for this entire sequence here.
Yeah, we haven't really mentioned it yet. It's one of my favourite montages just for the music, because I love the music at this point.
Yeah, it's very unusual for what you'd expect to hear on HBO, isn't it? There's Effigy or whatever the song is. And
it's Stelios Kazantzidis.
Wow. Yeah. So it's really nice, really. I don't know if the song is sad or not, but it certainly sounds sinister when it's overlaid along with this story.
It's meant to be sorrowful.
Okay.
I think it's like a love song.
Right. Okay.
But I think Effigy means she left.
Oh gosh. Okay. So it's pretty sad overall. Yeah. It's so that obviously that the montage to begin with is an interesting way to put this across. It's going to be our second montage after last week's montage. I certainly prefer this one. This one's a lot more deserving of a montage. And we also have a really nice use of a dolly zoom for the chat in the middle of the montage that Nick and Frank have, where we see the granary in the background, the big kind of symbol of the docks almost. And the way they dolly zoom in the shot means that the granary behind them shrinks in the scene. It becomes smaller. Which I thought was, it's a beautiful representation of the docks disintegrating in front of them, particularly when you consider that Frank may represent these docks as well. He's about to go as well, so I thought that was lovely way of putting it across.
Yeah, a nice bit of cinematography there.
And speaking of other cinematography, we have a kind of almost felt like a Breaking Bad style cinematography with the trolley and the FBI. The way the camera was mounted on that FBI trolley as the info went into it, that kind of struck me as very Vince Gilligan.
Yeah, that's true.
Something that The Wire never does again, actually, I don't think. So it's nice to see.
Another interesting choice points out the unusual nature of the montage, even as montages go for The Wire. The fact that the montage is broken up by areas of speech a couple of times. I'm not sure if there are any other montages that do that, where they kind of stop at certain points. As not the music doesn't stop, but it kind of dies down in order to have a little mini scene in between it, and then it starts up again.
Yeah. The music
that doesn't
music
really happen
fades
with
down,
the montages, as rare as they are. So
definitely, yeah. I think this is the last time we ever see a montage outside of the end ones. I don't think season 3 or 4 ever dabble in this kind of experimental stuff. It's very played very straight from now on. Feels like The Wire perhaps reaches the end of its experimentation now, and kind of really just sticks with its guns from here on out, which is cool. I kind of love how this final scene here with him walking towards the jetty is it's directed as a cliffhanger, but it really isn't, as there's so much finality to the outcome here. Kind of the way it closes up just before we see the consequences. So it's nice that there's that weird kind of relationship there with the scene. Yes.
So should we move on to our final sections?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much done with our recap.
I think
there.
that pretty much finishes the discussion. Yeah.
We need to sit down and talk, Frank.
I gotta see my son.
The man's right, Frank. Let's grab a cup of coffee or something.
Not now. I need to get clean.
So let's move on to our final characters, or our favourite characters even. Who really stood out for you in this episode? I think I know pretty much who it's going to be already.
It's impossible not to pick Frank, but I'd say Spiros and Beadie fight for second place for me, as far as this episode goes.
I think I would give another shout. I mean, I know we've mentioned James Ranson already, but the scene with Ziggy and Frank, I think they both together, because they're both such strong actors across the whole season, having them together in the scene, I don't understand why it's not used more often, because they're both so great,
yeah.
especially in this scene, that it just adds to the tragedy and the power of their performances. But yeah, it's got to be Frank. I mean, this is the sum of everything so far, and it all comes crashing down, and it's just bad news after bad news. And he tries to redeem himself. He tries to come back up again to fight what he believes in, to protect his Union men, to try and help Ziggy. Just gets him killed. It is the ultimate tragedy in The Wire, and Chris Bauer does an absolutely stunning job of portraying Frank Sobotka.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the real Frank-centric episode, isn't it, here? And they kind of remember him through the epigraph as well. That they have a habit of using epigraphs to underline major character deaths. It's been done with Wallace, it's been done with D'Angelo, again now with Sobotka. I think Stringer and Snoop also have the same treatment. There might be a few others in there as well, but that's kind of how the show remembers it, and it's not the greatest of epigraphs, if I'm honest, but it certainly is there for us to remember Frank by.
So how about favourite scenes?
Yeah, so we have a few. Greek and Spiros' dinner is pretty fantastic. I love seeing Spiros' softer side really emerge. We've seen echoes of it throughout the show. His respect for Nick, but it really, really pours out here with the Sobotkas on the line like they are. You sense that Spiros is becoming, his appetite is damaged by the fact that Nick is in danger here, which is nice to see. Beadie's tailing sequence in the hotel was great. Probably some of the tensest action or that we see in The Wire. I don't know if you can call it action. It's more of a kind of thriller sequence, I guess. Love the final montage with the Greek song. And also, I think perhaps most of all, though, the consoling scenes between Beadie and Frank and Nick and Spiros, the kind of parallel ones. It's just too many to mention, really. But those are the ones that really, really struck with me well.
Yeah, all good. I would also throw out the very opening scene, which I think was a very strong opening. Good parallels, like I mentioned before, to the Ziggy scene and kind of snapping into reality, this wake up.
Yeah.
I thought it was another good example of how losing a lot of the dialogue and just paying attention to these unspoken relationships between the characters was very effective. I also, as I mentioned a couple of times, just loved the scene with Ziggy and Frank at the prison. I thought it was incredibly tragic. It really highlighted the fact that they hadn't really spoken with one another directly at all, to any great extent throughout the whole series. There's only that one other moment where they're at the wharf where they have a lengthy conversation. Everything else is usually Ziggy getting told off in some way. So when they're here and it's Ziggy's basically just saying how fucked he is, it's just terrible, Both trying to keep it together, but it just highlights this really lonely, quite scary place with all this shouting going on in the background. Like, it is quite a nightmarish scene.
Definitely, yeah.
So yeah, and again, I was going to repeat a couple of the ones that you said, just echo the love for the scenes with Spiros, seeing a kind of softer side with him, and especially at the restaurant. And I think the song in the background in the restaurant is by the same person who does the montage at the end. I really do like that montage because of the music.
Okay.
Stelios Kazantzidis. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
I'm
also doing it with a silly voice, so you may want to disregard that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of nightmares, what do you reckon about the title?
I do like Bad Dreams. I think it is good. It's definitely utilised heavily throughout the episode, and when we've mentioned a couple of examples already. Like I said before, I certainly think that Frank wishes it was all a bad dream, because he's just living a nightmare in this episode. It just goes from bad to worse to even worse to him getting killed. So it is terrible.
Yeah.
And obviously, if the references to being woken up and sleeping at the beginning, do you think there's any other points that are pointing to our title, or is it mainly those bookends?
Yeah, it's the only obvious one I really felt was the one with Nick at the start. Yeah, it's the way we see him sleeping, we see the raids, and then once the raids are over, he kind of wakes up from the raids. It's a weird kind of relief moment. And yeah, as you say, just the bad dreams in general, kind of summarising both Frank and Nick's loss of grip on reality as they've descended down these kind of morally questionable paths, and it's all coming to bite them now. And it's just kind of summarising those pains they're feeling.
As for our epigraph from Frank, like you say, to some extent, this is meant to be in memorandum, I suppose.
Yeah.
Of Frank. But it's not a particularly striking epigraph.
Not at all, no.
I need to get clean, he says, as he gets away from his lawyer.
Yeah.
After being released. It's not really pointed at any other areas. I mean, it's not like Frank spends much time trying to get clean.
No.
So, it's not a particularly memorable, important, insightful, or heavily utilised epigraph. So, another forgettable one for me.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah, it's not very good.
It's a bit of a shame. I feel like there are quite a few other lines in this episode that would have been very good. We used to make stuff in this country build shit. Beadies, there are different kinds of wrong. There are plenty of other candidates, I think.
Definitely. I mean, The Wire tries not to go for the really obvious ones, does it? It wants to pick slightly more obscure ones for its epigraphs, but I feel like that one just was a bit wasted, as you say. We've had a run of a few now that just haven't quite hit the mark. And particularly in an episode that perhaps most directly addresses the theme of moral ambiguity more than any other in the show. There have been plenty of examples, as you say.
And the problems with institutions.
Yeah.
Major institutions being highlighted here. Again, another very important theme for The Wire. And it just kind of loses that, contiguity in having that its epigraph tied into that as well. Because otherwise, title's strong.
Yeah, title's strong.
Those big themes are there, so yeah, feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity.
Definitely. I mean, the episode's just so action-packed, isn't it? It's so fast-paced. It almost is like a dream whirlwind in itself. You have the raids, the arrests, the interrogations, the emotional exchanges, the tense scenes at the hotel and car park, the Omar Mouzone confrontation, the closing montage. I mean, the pace is at breakneck speed, really. And they still managed to make it a very Frank-centric episode in amongst all of that. Like, it's all about Frank. So I think it's a very, very accomplished episode, and really does feel like a nightmare for most of it. So
that's pretty much it, isn't it? That's the Pelikanos / penultimate episode.
Yeah, he always does this. He always writes the second to last episode, doesn't he? He's kind of known for doing the big climax moments in stories. So.
And being a Greek American, as George Pelikanos is, I'm sure he, was able to provide a valuable insight and took some pleasure from having all of these Greek storylines and these Greek music, and he was able to kind of provide a bit of authenticity to that, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's quite a few sections, more than any other episode that I can think of, where they speak Greek, and there's a lot of emphasis towards, drawing us into that Greek culture with the music and the restaurant and the, So it's adding a little bit of realism there, where we're a bit lost inside their world and we don't know what's going on. So nice to have that in the episode for sure.
Definitely, yeah.
And can you believe it? Next week is the final episode of season 2. How have we come this far?
It's incredible. We've been going since, I believe, August, is it? August last year. So we've been doing about 8-9 months now, and we're on our 25th episode next week. So.
Yeah, we've had quite a few breaks, admittedly, and we had Christmas in between and various other moments. So it's not exactly like we're going to do just 60 weeks, but nonetheless, it feels like the time's flown by, and here we are heading towards that finale, another finale.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we will see you then for next week, with or without a special guest.
Yeah, we haven't planned anything as of yet. But one way or the other, we will definitely join you on the 17th of April. No doubt for a bumper-length episode for our finale. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, we don't have any plans to go on a break anytime soon, do we?
No, I'm very happy to jump straight.
I say we go straight into season 3.
Absolutely. It's just very enjoyable now, actually, the podcasting about The Wire. It's something I look forward to every week.
Absolutely.
So it's at the start it was a bit more of a daunting prospect, but it really is just a pleasure now. So happy to bang these out as often as we can.
That's right. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us again. Check out our website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com, keeping up to date with any news and anything interesting related to the show. If we have anyone, special guest up on the show, then I'll post it up on the blog so you can see it there. And feel free to send us messages by visiting our contact page or sending us an email to caughtonthewire@gmail.com. I would also really appreciate if you're listening to us on iTunes, just to give us a little rating and a little review on there. If you want us to give a bit of time, if you want us to support the show, then give us a rating on iTunes. That would definitely help. So until next week for the finale of Season 2, Port in a Storm, farewell.
What you know about Baltimore?